Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And I'm going to go back nostalgically to when I was in high school, and it was Jimmy Carter against Ronald Reagan, the 76. No, actually, it was when it was first heating up. The basically election between Reagan and Carter, and Reagan was calling out Carter, calling him on the carpet. This is in the late 70s when he was thinking about running, and he was saying that it is an outrage that the deficit in America is $500 billion, 500 billion. That's a rounding error now. That was an outrage 40 years ago. And now, I mean, we're like Argentina in 1970. Just go print, and Argentina had a first-rate economy, by the way. No longer does. Just print money. I mean, it's really like the Weimar Republic. I mean, our deficit was, I think, in the 90s, around 10 trillion, around there. Then it started going down, and now it's up to, 30 trillion with these stimulus programs? I mean, Dr. Lopkin, the question is it really sustainable?
I know it isn't sustainable. And the big problem is that politicians love to spend, because when
they always have, though.
Yeah, but now
there was some restraint.
There's absolutely no restraint. And, at one point, back when we were on the gold standard, there was actually a limit to what they could print. Now that limit no longer exists, and now they're borrowing and borrowing. In fact, Governor Lamont of Connecticut put out his budget, and he's actually borrowing money to pay debt.
Well, that might make sense given there's 0% interest rates.
If he's refinancing it, yes. But the fact of the matter is, you're not eliminating debt that way. You're just accruing more of it. And that's basically what's going on. I mean, Trump, as a real estate guy, always was talking about, spending other people's money. And he was big. He wanted interest rates low so they could borrow and borrow and borrow. The Democrats have borrowed and borrowed and borrowed forever. So this is a bipartisan problem. Everybody is to blame. And they cannot seem to accept that at some point they've got to cut spending and stop borrowing so much.
Okay, but isn't I got you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right now, one of our biggest expenses is interest on the debt.
Yes, it's going to be about half our budget very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I think, and you tell me what your opinion is, Dr. Lopkin. I believe it was they tried gingerly doing this, like, let's say, when we got off the, 8 years off the gold. And I'm talking the Carter years, who, by the way, he was a fiscal conservative. People don't know that. But anyway, a little bit of deficit spending. I think Reagan was the first one to really balloon things, but, amateurish by today's standard in terms of the amount of debt. I always thought the politicians were a little apprehensive because they thought there would be repercussions, ramifications from this fiscally, politically. But really, there are none, is there? And when you really look at the big picture, if you're a politician, why would you cut spending? It's not going to happen on your watch in terms of when the balloon pops.
And that's the big problem, is that politicians haven't had any repercussions to this out-of-control spending. And, I mean, I absolutely loved Warren Buffett proposed what has become known as the Buffett rule, which is if the country is in debt and we do not have a balanced budget, everybody in Congress and the president are ineligible to run for office again.
I think that would be fantastic. It's like being a CEO of a company. You run your own company, Dr. Lopkin. If Modern Observer Group, if you're, I mean, eventually you can no longer function as a business, correct? You can't just
No,
go out there borrowing.
if I spent that much borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, I'd be out of business.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
And the thing is, a lot of the states are actually in this position because they can't print money. The federal government keeps bailing these groups out. That was a big part of the stimulus package that just passed. There were states that got aid that they weren't in trouble because of COVID. They were in trouble because they'd been spending like drunken sailors for years, and the stimulus bill that the Democrats rammed through just bailed them out.
No question about it. It was a big wink and a nod. I know we're moving on to another subject, but you talk about states that were fiscally in the red. I would have to say this Cuomo situation is getting a little more precarious. I don't see him making it.
No, he's not. If he ends up not resigning, he will either A, be impeached, or if it comes to the next election, there's no way he's getting reelected. His career is over.
Completely over. How did it all happen? I mean, his own actions are responsible. But could it have been that his fixation on being in the limelight drew, the term limelight, drew attention to him?
I think that's certainly part of it. I think, a lot has been made of the sexual allegations against him, but honestly, I don't think those would have come to light if it weren't for the COVID nursing home scandal. People can forgive a lot of things from politicians. And, I mean, in certain cases, they have actually forgiven or excused aberrant behavior. Take a look at the woman that came forward to accuse Joe Biden. People went, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It's Joe Biden. It's fine. But when you're taking senior citizens and you're putting them into death traps, when they have an alternative and you're risking senior citizens' lives, that's unforgivable. People cannot forgive that. So once that came about, everybody started coming out with all of the other things that he's done wrong.
Okay, but how much hubris is that in terms of you screwed it up, okay, and you have the chutzpah to go head-to-head with Trump in terms of for the limelight. You can't resist. You got to do your daily briefing. He was the golden boy, so to speak, the darling of the liberal media. That's chutzpah in terms of, like you said, putting at-risk seniors back in nursing homes, creating a death trap, and you have the chutzpah to expound on your brilliance.
It was absolutely amazing, and it came back to bite him in his butt, because the simple fact of the matter is he was being held up as the gold standard. People kept saying they wanted him running for president in the 2020 election. They were certainly trying to groom him for 2024 or 2028, given Biden's win. But it was a house of cards. He was, they put him forward as he's the standard bearer. Look how much better he is at Trump. And it turned out he was so much worse.
Agreed. Now, concluding this podcast, as we're talking, liberalism with all its ideals. Isn't it kind of interesting? There was an article in the New York Post about Connecticut being one of the most segregated states in the union, and how some activists are trying to reverse that by various measures. But when you really look at it, Dr. Lopkin, I would not be surprised at all if the always chastised South is much more integrated than the liberal North and West Coast of this country. the pontificators of social justice.
Yeah, I don't know if the South is more integrated, but using Connecticut as the example, Connecticut is one of the most progressive left-leaning states in the country. It's right up there with New York City and California. And the state of Connecticut, one, yes, is one of the most segregated states in the country. Two, the education funding has been found to be discriminatory in a court of law, and the legislature has refused to do anything about it. The housing department has been found to be discriminatory in a court of law, and the legislature has not done nothing about it. Connecticut actively discriminates. They discriminate against minorities. They discriminate against the disabled. They discriminate against the poor. And yet, this is allegedly one of the most progressive states out there. Oh, they all vote Democrat. They're all, they vote liberal. But when it comes down to action, it's what we've always referred to as the NIMBY problem, not in my backyard. In theory, oh yes, everybody should be equal, but oh no, we don't want them in our backyard.
I know, I would agree with that 100%, but isn't it also the adage, do as I say, not as I do? I mean, your big socialist Bernie Sanders didn't really have a full-time job till he was in his 40s, has now never been better in terms of financially, doing better than 0.5% of America, still expounding socialistic ideals. He's not really practicing what he preaches, is he?
Oh, no. And this is very common among liberals. It's the do as I say, not as I do. I mean, the best example was a few years ago when this huge climate change global conference was being held, and all of these big environmentalists showed up in private jets.
Oh, well, Gore he has one of the most, the biggest carbon footprint with his housing, and what's his name? Our ex-Secretary of State Kerry.
Yeah, John Kerry does the same thing. He shows up to climate change conferences flying, in a private jet, and it's like, no, lead by example. This is something liberals seem incapable of doing.
Well, yes, I agree with that. And Kerry you could chalk that up to stupidity, but that's another edition of Carnivore Bites. We will be live, Dr. Lopkin, won't we, this Friday?
We will be live Friday at 4. You can tune in at blogtalkradio.com/Carnivore Radio, where you can be part of the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. Thank our listeners. Take care.
You've been listening to Carnivore Bites, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us every week on carnivoreradio.com, exvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcast Store, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you find podcasts.